one of the things that becomes more obvious to me is that instead of just telling you, well, if I tell you, you won't know. You will merely have been told. So what I want to do is to give you the tools to study and learn on your own. Now, do we have any Latin scholars here? Yes, excellent. Please read my shirt and tell everyone what it says.
Something, therefore I know.
Let go.
I don't know.
Little plastic blocks. No, I read. I read. Therefore I know. So if I tell you, you will not know, you will merely have been told. So instead I'm going to tell you how to find out on your own. So how do you know, as opposed to just being told? You read original sources, because anything modern is suspect. You think for yourself, including questioning everything that I tell you, that Pastor Whitney tells you, that anyone else here. Think it through for yourself. Even if you then agree, you will understand better why you agree. And evaluate what you see, what you hear, and what you read via principles. Not how it makes you feel, but in accordance with principles. What principles? Well, like maybe the principles that the documents were written from. The honor of God is to hide a thing, and the honor of kings is to search out a matter. Proverbs tell us that. And in Revelation, we are told that we are kings and priests to our God. So it's our honor to search out a matter. That also means it's our duty to search out a matter. So just believing something because I told it to you means that you are not doing your duty. Public school is brainwashing you into a compliant citizen, says the little sign. And the teacher comes out and says, if those kids could read, they'd be really upset. Don't be those kids. Right? Read. Don't be a compliant citizen, a good little subject. Think. So the principles and the tools we're going to be using is, what were the founders trying to do when they wrote the Constitution? What were the assumptions that underlay every choice they made? What principles for governance were they trying to build on? What was going on in the world that they were responding to? What weaknesses did they miss? And a good chunk of the nonsense we see going on today is directly attributable to weaknesses they missed. And then how do we use all of this in our own study of the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, your state constitution, any proposed legislation or amendment? Use it in everything. So first, what were the founders trying to do? They were trying to develop a working government based on the principles and addressing the concerns that they enumerated in the Declaration of Independence, among other things. They were creating a civil federal government for 13 states that were going to be united for this purpose. They were defining, establishing, and limiting the powers of that government. They were trying to ensure decentralization by federalization among the states, separate from state, county, and local jurisdictions. And one of the things that's part of your homework is to find out what federalizing means, because it's not the same as making a nation. There are similarities, there are differences. Go figure it out. If I tell you, you will not know, you will merely have been told. So each of these government levels are going to operate in its own milieu. free from federal interference. You don't want the elevators in your local town buildings under the inspection jurisdiction of a federal bureaucracy in Utah, unless you like taking the stairs, right? And you don't want the selectmen of your town being in charge of picking the next ambassador to Kazakhstan. It's the wrong level of government. So each operates in its own area. They were trying to establish a republic, which is limited and restricted by a constitution. You should know the difference between a republic and a democracy. This is dangerous to our democracy. No kidding it is. We're not a democracy. The founders hated democracies because democracies were dangerous and led to tyranny, always. So every time someone says it's dangerous to our democracy, your response should be, hallelujah. Bring it on. And they were also seeking to restrict the areas of action of that federal government to mostly international issues and a few intra-national issues, areas between the states. So that would be Article 1, Section 8, and Article 4 of the Constitution. They were trying to develop this government based on Christian principles and precepts, not Jewish, not Muslim, not Buddhist, not secular, Christian.
Yes.
Most definitely Christian. They wanted to ensure that the rights of the citizens as given to them by God under their status as being the image and likeness of God and imbued with His Spirit were protected from the government they were creating. And also protecting their personal interference with others within the law. So there is civil government protections as well as protections from the government. They wanted to protect worship by individual Christian denominations. They were protecting freedom in Christ, not license to sin.
Right.
A lot of what people call freedom today is just an excuse to sin without guilt.
Yes.
And it is not freedom because it is enslavement to the sin that they participate in.
Right.
Paul told us all about that. They wanted to protect those who would criticize government missteps and errors. They did not think that it was worth protecting blasphemy or obscenity. Freedom of speech is completely congruent and consonant with laws against blasphemy and obscenity, because what they were protecting was freedom of political expression. And they were protecting the rights of citizens from infringement by other citizens through the civil and the criminal law structures. They're also they took the assignment of political power being in the people, not in a sovereign secular leader. We have no king but Jesus, as Pastor Lear used to say. And the civil power in a republic was subject to the people. We are not the subjects of an overarching government. We are the sovereigns who are sharing some of our power with different levels of government for the purposes we assign to that government. They sought to prevent the government from taking any power over the people's defense against the government. We had just won the Revolutionary War that had a citizens' militia against the best trained, best funded, best armed army on the planet at that time. They would never have acceded to anything that limited the power of the people to do the same thing again if need came to that. They were protecting the privacy of the individual and the property of the individual. Why did they want to protect all these things? Look at the Declaration of Independence, look at the history of the colonies leading up to the Revolutionary War, and you'll see exactly why. They wanted to prevent the government from stopping the citizens' legal and civil actions against any future overreach of the government. They wanted to prevent the government from using lawfare against its own citizens, which it is now doing, but they're going right back to what the government under George III did. They wanted to prevent lawfare as a general tactic with citizen against citizen or corporation against citizen. And they wanted a structure that could demand equitable treatment under the law to everyone, regardless of your wealth, influence, or political or social position. They were also trying to fix weaknesses that 11 years under the Articles of Confederation had demonstrated. Those articles, they were so allergic to a strong central government, they made the articles so weak it didn't function. It required unanimity between competing interests, and that doesn't work. If you've got 13 people in a room and you've got to agree on the toppings for 4 pizzas before you can order anything, who's going home hungry? Everybody. If you have to have unanimous consent, what you get is deadlock and nothing.
Right, that's good.
They couldn't even force attendance at the Continental Congress, which, among other things, delayed the acceptance of the peace treaty with Great Britain to end the Revolutionary War because they didn't have people there to accept it. They had no power required to raise funds. The Congress, the Continental Congress, had to beg the states for money to pay the bills, and the states were really good at saying the check is in the mail. If someone tells you the check is in the mail, when are you getting paid? Bingo, never, yes. And the agreements with other countries that were made were not enforceable on the states. So the states were setting out their own treaties for trade with other countries and all manner of things that just did not work as a group for group interests. The states were treating the other states as if they were foreign countries with imposing tariffs. If somebody signed a contract in one state and crossed the border, it wasn't enforceable anymore. There were terrible problems there. There was no common currency, and the Continental Congress was the only branch, and there was only one vote per state. So the states had some representation, but the people had no specific voice. Then they wanted to put in place sufficient safeguards that were going to protect the structure they were building. So there were 3 federal branches, plus the states, plus the people who are supposed to be in charge of it all, watchdogging and safeguarding everything. They split up the responsibilities. They split up the privileges. They required multiple supermajorities for large changes. They were drawing on centuries of English common law, as written up by Blackstone and others, and they limited the privileges acceptable or retained by those who were holding office, and they also limited the other roles they could play while in office. So what were the assumptions that they were building on but did not directly state? Because this informs everything that they wrote and left open places that where trouble could creep in. They were assuming that the United States would be comprised of a devout and godly Christian population of mostly British descent, seeking to build good lives, working for the glory of God, and worshiping Him in accordance with their own denominational traditions. They were assuming there would be Christian biblical education as the basis for common knowledge and wisdom. They were again drawing on centuries of English common law, and also the extensive legal resources in de Vatel and Locke and others that were all widely available at the time and widely read at the time. They were assuming a civil governance that was built on God's justice system, as Pastor Whitney was just telling us about in the last hour, deeply rooted in the Ten Commandments. They were assuming that the men who would be seeking to govern knew their place in the hierarchy of godly governance as the representatives of God, implementing godly principles of justice, mercy, and restitution to maintain the Christian liberty of the people and protect their rights. And that all of those leaders knew that one day they would face the perfect judge before whom they would give an account for every action or failure to act, that they would be statesmen who would keep their responsibilities to God, the nation, the states, and the people in mind, that they would act as fiduciaries. When you are a fiduciary, your duty, your sworn duty, is to put the good of the group for which you are fiduciary above your own good. Doesn't sound like bribery and corruption has much place there, does it? President Thomas Jefferson, who is widely called a deist, wrote, "No nation has ever existed or been governed without religion, nor can be. The Christian religion is the best religion that has been given to man, and I, as chief magistrate of this nation, am bound to give it the sanction of my example." So even if he didn't fully believe, and he did have periods of doubt and unbelief, he saw it as his duty to uphold the Christian faith. Freedom of religion should more accurately have been termed Christian peace between denominations. The non-specificity was a mistake. They never called us out as a Christian nation, and that was an error.
Yeah, right.
It could have been backed by how to determine who is a Christian, because anybody can waltz in and say that they're a Christian, but that doesn't make them a Christian. They missed keeping in mind religious moral authority as the basis for civil government. Right? That's the moral authority for civil government. And they missed that if you don't have dependence on a moral, informed, and conscientious electorate to protect the structures you've built, if you don't have provisions to require those factors, you're not going to have firm structures. They're going to fall apart over time. There was no provision for that. There was no requirement written into the Constitution that the voters have skin in the game, that they would be people who would be paying for the programs that were being voted on. But in 1787, when they wrote the Constitution, there were no taxes on individuals. There were taxes apportioned to the states by population, and the states had different methods of collecting those taxes. There were also federal taxes of excise and impost and the like. And they also missed weaknesses by infiltration from humanism in using the inclusive terminology from the Enlightenment. And many of the perversions of original intent in the Constitution can be traced directly to the inclusive language that came directly from the Enlightenment philosophers. They missed those. This was an intellectual movement that was based in Europe. It was secular in nature. It influenced many in America, and it did have some good points, but like any type of infiltration, it uses the good points to subvert It takes a little bit of good and slides a little bit of bad in with it, and in just a short 200 years, the bad takes over the good, and the good is relegated to the dustbin of history. There are embedded perversions of Christian precepts in the Enlightenment principles, and they are there if you look for them, and once you see them, you can't unsee them, but the people writing the Constitution missed them at the time. They're principles for governance. English common law, as exposited by Blackstone in his commentaries on the law of England. The Ten Commandments is the basis for that common law. Minimal interference by the government in the day-to-day lives of individuals, a government subservient to the people and the states that created it, and a republic limited by the Constitution to specific legal and legitimate areas of action. What was going on in the world around them? This new nation had big loans that were due to France and Spain. England was very resentful for having lost to these upstart colonists, and they also lost access to the resources of the central portion of North America. There was generalized greed on the part of the European powers for those natural resources. There was slave trading, very lucrative slave trading, largely from North Africa via Atlantic routes and Mediterranean routes that were going on. There was increasing Christian church-led anti-slavery movements in North America, England, and Europe. And there was increasing dissent in France that was shortly going to lead to the French Revolution, which led to Napoleon, and then to more general war across Europe. England had lost the Central American territories they held to Spain by treaty. They expanded their holdings in Canada. They had some disagreements with France over commerce. George III was getting increasingly unstable, and they were also being distracted somewhat by the Second Anglo-Mysore War in India, between Mysore, which was an ally of the French, and the British East India Company, and there was an increase in English holdings in India after that war. Now in France, there was pressure on the French territories in Canada because of the English expansion around them. And again, they were the other side of the kerfuffles with England over commerce. The seeds of the French Revolution were starting. At that time, they were not yet seen as the danger they were. That was going to take another 5 years or so. There was huge debt because of France's war in the Revolutionary War that was again going to feed the French Revolution. And there was this loss of territorial control in India and in North America to some extent. Now, Spain had expanded their Central American territories by that same treaty with England. They were at peace with England after Spain's role in the Revolutionary War, and they had increased territory in North America and in the Caribbean after the Revolutionary War surrounding the southern United States. And they avoided the debt problems of France because of the silver mines they had found in South America. So that's sort of the geopolitical structure of what they were working with. Yep. The Enlightenment, this is again more weaknesses. I think some of my slides got discombobulated. Sorry about that. The Enlightenment brought what I called last year word spells. Right? That's things that sound good, but if you look at them carefully, they actually mean the opposite of what they claim. Liberty in the Enlightenment was license. It was not liberty in Christ. The same thing with the word freedom. If it's not coupled with responsibility, it turns into licentiousness and a deterioration in the culture and in society. Free speech, which is encoded in the First Amendment. Free speech is never universal. I mean, just look at what the left is doing now. If you don't agree in lockstep with everything they say, these proponents of free speech who used free speech to get where they are now want to shut you down. Speech is never free. Free speech is never universal. There is always a limitation somewhere. The question is, what are you going to limit? They failed to limit this to speech of political disagreement within the context of a republic that protects individual rights under Christian principles. They were also guilty of naivete, as learned as they were. Despite centuries of history, they were not expecting infiltration, subversion, inversion of the culture, and internal strife to the extent that it has now occurred. They also expected that the issue of slavery would be resolved without moral cowardice leading to war. They promised in the Constitution they would not stop the practice of slavery before 1808. That was one generation of time to give the southern states, Georgia and South Carolina specifically, that objected to a more strong stance against it, giving them a full generation to make accommodations in their cultures and in their laws and in their economic systems. If you promise not to end something before a certain date, the expectation there is that after that date you're going to stop it. And I challenge you to find any place in the Constitution that expressly permits the expansion of slavery into any new territory. And if you think you've found it, then compare that with the principles in the Declaration of Independence that say all men are created equal. And then try to justify and align those two. You cannot do it. Therefore, slavery is an offense against the laws of God and has to be ended one way or another. Any failure of moral courage in righting wrongs and addressing evils leads to a greater cost in fixing those same problems later. They did not specifically protect Christianity. They never specifically called the United States a Christian nation, even though it was founded by people who came here to worship Christ freely in accordance with their own precepts and denominational requirements. And they did not prevent proselytizing by non-Christian faiths. They were assuming a culture of perpetual Christianity. They were assuming a culture of continued common history and traditions, and that the political parties that would eventually form would be under the control of the people rather than in control of the people. And those parties are now, of course, controlled by deeper interests. They also failed to provide a way to get out of this perpetual union. There were very careful procedures delineated for how to join the union, first as a territory and then as a state, or how to subdivide states, but there was no prescribed way to leave, despite knowing history and despite the Declaration of Independence stating that it is the right and the duty of the people to alter or to abolish the form of government they are under. Here's a more subtle weakness they missed, that America was born in rebellion, and there remains in America a rebellious spirit. We celebrate Independence Day in rebellion, not America Day. And rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. That rebellious spirit has left open a pathway, as Christian faith has eroded, for pagan practices to enter.
Right.
And the people who now claim to be secular and non-Christian and anything else, they are diving headlong into Eastern religions and pagan practices. There are people that I know who worship Thor and Odin. Yeah. All the pagan practices are coming back because America was born in a spirit of rebellion that was never excised. They did not put in proper protections against the misuse of the full faith and credit clause. And that was the one used to ram gay marriage acceptance into all the states, even though the states internally had voted against such acceptance. The Commerce Clause was, again, not properly limited. The limitations are there, but you have to look for them and you have to understand them. So if you refuse to look and you refuse to understand, then you can misuse the Commerce Clause. And if you have a population that has been distracted by life in general and a deteriorating culture and economical system, they're gonna fail in their duty as watchdogs as well. So without limitations, the Commerce Clause has been overused as well. And there are other weaknesses that they missed, and your job is to go find them and to think about how you think they should be addressed. They were not specific enough about citizenship and voting, how to prove that you're a citizen. Direct references to Vattel's rules that they drew on heavily is missing. They do not have a clear statement that voting is restricted to citizens. It is implied, it is stated obliquely in several places, but it is not overtly stated until the 14th Amendment, where it talks about citizen voting. At the time they wrote the Constitution, voting was restricted mainly to property owners. They never said if they wanted that restriction to apply at the federal level as well. And skin in the game is crucial. They never expected large swaths of the population to be living off of government largesse, but they had people who were going to be voting who were also expected to pay the cost of what they were voting for. It's really easy to vote for more money if somebody's just going to hand it to you. If it's going to come out of your pocket, you're a lot more careful with it. So how do we use all of these tools in study? We have to keep the principles of the Declaration of Independence in mind, evaluating the purpose and meaning of the sections of the Constitution. Look at how a section addresses weaknesses that were exposed under 11 years living under the Articles of Confederation. Look at how the assumptions the founders made influence the words that they chose to use. And you also have to keep in mind that some words shift meanings over time by checking with older dictionaries. And you'll see I have the word online crossed out. The latest year zero change the history nonsense that they're pulling is that they are changing older dictionaries online. They're substituting more modern meanings and backdating usages. They're doing the same thing with online encyclopedias. Go to your local used bookstore or thrift store and look for old copies of encyclopedias, Britannicas, Collier's, Funkin' Wagnalls. Get an old encyclopedia because what is in it has not been electronically changed because it's been printed on paper and it's been that way for decades. You can't trust anything online anymore. Make original history your hobby. And I really think that they do this on purpose, that they make history in school mind-numbingly boring so that you hate it and want nothing to do with it. But if you look at history as a story of people and what were they facing and how did they deal with it and what were the shenanigans going on behind the scenes, it becomes as fascinating as a murder mystery, except that it's real. Anything written in the last century probably more, is corrupt. Video histories, they're almost all corrupt. Contemporaneous sources may not be completely correct, so you have to look for both sides of the story. Propaganda is not a new invention. Weight the recorded actions over what people said. Right? Talk is cheap. What did they do? Talk is also used to hide purposes. But the actions that are taken will tell you a lot more. For example, the Republican National Committee has come out with their platform for 2024. Go look at it and tell me how it is in any way different from the Democrat platform of 15 years ago. And then answer to yourself the question, what are they supposedly conserving? If they're just Democrat light and 15 years out of step, what good are they? Actions, not talk. And beware of the agendas on all sides. Lee Brainerd, who has a ministry called Soothkeep, has a slogan, and he says, truth above all else, truth at any cost. Who is truth?
Jesus.
Exactly. Multi-century plans to destroy from within do not and cannot originate from human sources. Who is the father of lies?
Devil.
Who is the prince of the power of the air?
Devil.
Who is the prince of this world?
Devil.
This world is ruled by an immortal, insane psychopath who hates people because God loves them, and his hatred for people is only marginally less than his hatred for God.
Right.
Evaluate everything in accordance with that. Question everything, including everything I've set up here.
Right. That's good.
What if my statement that this world is ruled by an immortal, insane psychopath is right? What does that mean for what you see around you? Well, what if I'm wrong? What does that mean for what you see around you? Use the brain God gave you and evaluate it all. Remember that there are factions on each side, within sides, and that they will fight against each other, and that a lot of times what you see is internal squabbles, but not anything better. They will position themselves, I'm doing the better thing. No, you're just trying to do better than your former buddy over there because you disagree on something internally. Watch for the word spells. The left is expert at word spells, especially in namings. Any bill that's been put forward in the last 30 years, the name is exactly the opposite of what it actually will do. Right? And that's also part of the inversion. What they say is the opposite of truth, the opposite of what they plan, the opposite of what they intend, but it's designed to sucker you in and make you think, oh, this guy's great. I want this bill to pass because it says wonderful things in the title. At this point, I only have trust in people that have been silenced, deplatformed, banned, censored, or fact-checked, and not even all of them. I'm going to give you two examples from history and you decide. Henry VIII of England, he divorced his wife because he wanted an heir to the throne, and he broke away from the Roman Catholic Church to do this. Or did he? Was he instead trying to stop a Habsburg takeover of England? Because the Habsburgs did manage it briefly during the reign of Mary Tudor. And look up the spread of the Habsburg rule in Europe. I don't know the truth. Look it up. It's very interesting. President Lincoln, he kept the republic whole and he ended slavery, or did he? Was he instead the first American dictator who jailed his detractors and destroyed the republic? See an alternate view on YouTube from Razor Fist. Language warning, he has a potty mouth. Both cases are different, intriguing, possible, very plausible, but are they true? Go look and see. Right? Evil is never satisfied with toleration. It demands first toleration, then ratification, then celebration, then co-participation. And for anybody who didn't get this reference last year, I cannot recommend this set of videos more highly. L.A. Marzulli Calvary Church, April 2023, 3 completely separate videos. I'll leave that slide up. Thank you very much.